An historic Iowa legislative session enters the rearview mirror. We'll break down the bills and battles of the past 4 months with Iowa journalists on the front lines, all during this Reporters Roundtable edition of Iowa Press.
Funding for Iowa Press was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation, Iowa Community Foundations, an initiative of the Iowa Council of Foundations, connecting donors to the causes and communities they care about, for good, for Iowa, forever. Details at iowacommunityfoundations.org. The Associated General Contractors of Iowa, the public's partner in building Iowa's highway, bridge, and municipal utility infrastructure.
I'm a dad.
I am a mom.
I'm a kid.
I'm a kid at heart. I'm a banker.
I'm an Iowa banker.
No matter who you are, there is an Iowa banker who is ready to help you get where you want to go. Iowa Bankers, allowing you to discover the genuine difference of Iowa banks.
Iowa Communications Network. The availability of high-speed broadband service is essential to fulfilling the promise of a connected Iowa. ICN's Broadband Matters campaign showcases the importance of delivering broadband to all corners of Iowa. Information is available at broadbandmatters.com.
UIE Care is helping provide access to healthcare services to more Iowans. By offering online visits with a University of Iowa healthcare provider, UIE Care helps Iowans seek medical care without leaving home. Learn more at uiecare.com.
For decades, Iowa Press has brought you politicians and newsmakers from across Iowa and beyond. Now celebrating more than 40 years of broadcast excellence on statewide Iowa Public Television. This is the Friday, April 21 edition of Iowa Press. Here is David Yepsen.
The 2017 legislative session will go down as an historic 4-month period of contentious partisan battles and Republican accomplishments. Democrats argue it's been a nightmare. From collective bargaining changes to budget disagreements, conservatives have reigned with a decisive majority and have kept outgoing Governor Terry Branstad's signing hand very busy. But as the dust settles, what is the lasting legacy of this session? Well, we've convened a panel of Iowa reporters to dive deeper. Aaron Murphy is Des Moines Bureau Chief for Lee Enterprises. James Lynch writes for the Gazette in Cedar Rapids. Jason Noble is my old job as the chief political reporter for the Des Moines Register, and Kay Henderson is news director at Radio Iowa. Well, I'm glad you're all surviving the session. Nothing like a warm spring day to make those Republican farmers in the legislature want to adjourn and go home, right?
Exactly.
Well, let's do the round the table winners and losers, Kay. I'll ask each of you for this question. Out of this session, who are the big winners? Who are the big losers?
Well, winners, gun lovers, fans of tort reform, ultimately Governor Terry Branstad, because he's leaving a huge legacy on the law books of Iowa based on the work product of this legislative session. Losers, perhaps the remaining remnants of Governor Ray's legacy in that the Republican-led legislature has very much changed the collective bargaining law that he signed into law in the 70s, and they've even dismantled his program, which required a small portion of state spending on buildings be spent on artwork.
Maybe the bottle bill next year.
Exactly.
James, what's winners and losers to you?
People who like fireworks are winners. Business interests who saw changes in workers' comp and expanded drug testing and tort reform, as Kay mentioned. People who want privacy in bathrooms, I guess, are winners, since they're banning cameras in bathrooms. Buttercups. They won't have to suck it up.
You want to explain what that means?
There were bills introduced. They were referred to as the Suck It Up Buttercup bills for people who, one of the targets was people who go out onto a state highway to protest and block traffic, and this would have increased the penalties for doing that, but those bills died.
Aaron?
One group that's maybe a little bit of winners and losers, pro-life voters. They got a significant bill that bans abortions after 20 weeks. Requires an ultrasound and a 3-day waiting period before an abortion. But there is a significant percentage of that population that wanted more, wanted the so-called personhood bill that defines life at fertilization. And talking to some lawmakers, there will be an effort to take another crack at that again next session. So we'll see that. Another big loser, I'll try and use them all up so Jason's really scrambling here, are the unions. The collective bargaining bill was a big hit for unions in Iowa.
Jason?
Yeah, I think if you look at the Democratic Party here, you could definitely sort of classify the party as losing out a lot, especially with, as Aaron mentioned, the changes to Chapter 20. A lot of the fundraising that happens with the Democratic Party occurs with union donations. That's going to be a problem for them sort of long term. But you could also look at it, you know, the out party in a political session like this has an opportunity to step out on issues and sort of make their voice heard. And so there are sort of individual Democrats who could be sort of seen as winners because they've raised their political profile here. I'm thinking of Nate Bolton in the state Senate, Todd Pritchard in the state House, both looking at runs for governor. Senator Janet Peterson also have sort of built greater awareness of themselves that could help them politically down the road.
Is this a landmark session? What's anybody think?
Yeah, I think so.
Why do you say that?
Well, we've seen this shift over the last 6 years or so of Iowa becoming a more Republican state. Now the Republicans are governing, and the steps they took this year were decisive.
James, I wonder if this wasn't the biggest landmark since the 65 Democratic session. The Democrats won big, and then 64 came in. I mean, they built community colleges. Is this the Republican equivalent of that?
I'm not sure that there's a landmark issue that would quite rival that. I mean, the lasting impact of collective bargaining changes, maybe 50 years from now, we'll say this was a landmark. For some people, this might be better described as a landslide session, and they were at, the unions were at the bottom of that landslide. Democrats were at the bottom of that landslide. But I think Republicans made big changes if you go back 20 years when they were in control, they made some big changes. When Democrats took control of the governor's office and both chambers of the legislature, they had that pent-up demand and made big changes. They talk about, they made some collective bargaining changes, but they raised the minimum wage, they addressed civil rights issues, things like that. So I think anytime you have one party take complete control, you're going to have that sort of landmark legislation. How lasting remains to be seen.
Bill Dix, the new Republican majority leader in the Iowa Senate, famously said before the session started that they were going to kick the door in. And they had some issues that they had pent-up demand for. What was interesting as things played out during the session, there was a little bit uncertainty between the Republican-led House and the Republican-led Senate about how far they would go. That was most starkly realized in their debate over abortion. They thought 20 weeks was as far as they would go, so that's what cleared the Senate. And then when it got over to the House, they went even further with the three-day waiting period and the seeing of the image of the fetus before an abortion.
Yeah, I agree. This is definitely a landmark session. You just look at the legislation that was passed. These are bills that are going to have an impact on people's lives. The collective bargaining is a big one. Obviously, the abortion bans, the tort reform. Individuals won't be able to seek as much in some cases in lawsuits, workers' compensation. So then the next question is, as Jason alluded to, Republicans have been trying to get to this point. Now they're governing. The next thing we find out starting in 2018 is what Iowans think of these new programs.
After every major piece of legislation gets passed, whether it's at the Statehouse or in Congress, there's a period of litigation that follows over what was intended, and then there's a period of tweaking the legislation. Aaron, what do you see ahead for 2018 along those fronts? I mean, the abortion thing is going to be heading to the courts all over the country. What do you see?
Yeah, and as I alluded to, there's going to be some who will want to take steps even further on abortion. The collective bargaining one is headed right for the courts. A lawsuit has already been filed. We'll see what happens there. But that has been upheld in other states that did similar tweaks. Wisconsin's was challenged, its collective bargaining reform, and the courts upheld that law there. So I don't know if that will be changed at all.
Jason?
If there was sort of one mitigating factor here on how momentous this session was, it was really the budget situation and the the fact they had to cut a lot of the budget, they had to borrow from the rainy day fund, they're going to have to pay that back. That really sort of stymied some of the other big steps that the Republican majority wanted to take on education reform, on tax reform, all those others. And so we'll see in 2018 if the budget picture is better, that they can take on some of those things that are going to be seen more positively maybe by voters.
And one sort of fascinating thing to me was, given the budget reality they faced, was that Republicans who always talk about smaller and leaner government didn't seize the day and start closing an agency here or there or ending a program. That didn't happen. It was more judicious cuts to particular programs and agencies rather than just wholesale change.
It seems like their approach is to starve the beast. We're just going to cut everything and cut it, a slice here, a slice there, rather than just say we're not going to have a Department of Education anymore. We're just closing down this agency, or natural resources, or the Water Quality Bureau, or something like that. It's just starve the beast slowly.
Jason, isn't that smart politics for Republicans to do that? This is not an election year. Let's cut budgets, make people squeal now, and then next year, an election year, when they come back, hopefully it's all sweetness and light and we don't have to do these kind of cuts.
Absolutely, yeah. The question is, 18 months from now when it's election day, are voters who might have been really upset in February about changes to collective bargaining, or might be really upset about changes to or cuts to funding for Planned Parenthood, is that still going to be front of mind for them in November? On the flip side, next year, if they can enact a big income tax cut that's going to make a difference for people immediately, that might be what they take into the ballot box with them.
Do any of you, in your coverage of Iowa's economy, do any of you see any kind of rebound or recovery starting now that may help improve tax revenues a year from now, Aaron?
The folks that I've talked to about this say, I guess maybe cautiously optimistic would be a fair summary. They see some signs that the farm economy is improving a little bit, they see projections that say things are going to improve slightly, but they're very hesitant about it. I think this year and those budget cuts really I don't know, frightened is the right word, but startled legislators and the Revenue Estimating Conference and any projections that you talk to people about now. Maybe I think so, but we'll see. The much more cautious approach.
Well, we see sometimes signs nationally that consumer spending is lagging, and that's been the real problem area for this budget. The state primarily depends upon income taxes to generate revenue, but sales taxes are a significant portion, and they are growing zilch. And one of the problems is people are buying things online and they're not paying sales taxes.
Right, and that's going to be part of the tax debate.
But the problem here is it's not really going to get solved until the federal government gets involved and provides some sort of framework for collection of state sales taxes and distribution back to the states.
I remember Marvin Selden when he was state comptroller. He always said, I pay attention to the price of hogs because I know if the farmers are making money, we're going to have tax revenues. So pay attention to the economy. James, let's talk about some of the specific issues that you see coming up next year. One debate is over education vouchers.
Right, and that's a debate that they tried to start this year, but part of it was the budget. They didn't have money to do that, and so that debate really never picked up any momentum. But Walt Rogers chairs the House Education Committee and says he wants to have that debate next year. He thinks not only is it a good idea, but it's probably good politics to appeal to a lot of urban and suburban parents who would like to be able to use some of that state money to send their kids to the local private school, parochial school. Democrats want to have that debate too. They think it's great politics going into an election year to be talking about diverting state education dollars into these private educational savings accounts or vouchers, and so they think it really works to help them with their base. So I look for that debate to be very contentious next year.
Okay, one of the issues that you mentioned, we've all mentioned here, the tax policy. So they didn't do anything on taxes in this
But
session.
they want to next year. Kim Reynolds, the lieutenant governor who will become governor, has already talked about the framework that she'd like to see. Senate Republicans were anxious to release some of the details of their plan, making it simpler, reducing the number of brackets that are in Iowa's taxes, and getting rid of, I think it's a real prospect that they will get rid of the primary deduction, which is called federal deductibility. We get to deduct in Iowa our federal income tax liability from our income before we calculate our taxes. That actually makes Iowa's top income tax rate at the state level appear too high. I think that may be a goner this year, which would be incomprehensible for you and I when we covered the legislature. And Terry Branstad, remember when he proposed that in a condition of the state message, and boy, it got flushed fast by Republican legislators. So
Aaron, what do you see on that tax debate? That is an historic change for Republicans to switch on federal debt.
Yeah, and they not only want to do it next year, they wanted to do it this year. That would have been right at the top of their wish list. It comes back to the revenue. We talked to Senator Randy Feenstra, who unveiled his plan about that, and on the House side, Representative Vander Linden, who is the chairman of the tax committee there, he said, yeah, that all sounds great. I am on board with everything, but it depends on the revenue. If we don't have the revenue next year, we can't do it. And so those quarterly revenue estimating conferences will be closely watched by Republican legislators with the hope that there is money in the budget to do these things.
Jason, why didn't they do a tax bill this year? They've taken care of all these other Republican interest groups. Why didn't they do something on the income tax?
Well, if you cut the income tax, then you're cutting revenue to the state at a time when it's already down. I mean, that was sort of the fiscal reality that was facing them, and it may be better politics to do it a year from now.
Well, why don't they just do it anyway and live with the revenues that it would generate?
Well, that's part of the challenge of governing. As when you're the party who's not in power, you can talk about that and talk about starving the beast. But when you're running government, you get a better understanding of how important these programs are.
You start answering to people who are upset about those cuts.
Well, one of the reasons, James, that federal deductibility looks like things are changing is economic development. As Kay mentioned, if you have federal deductibility, your income tax rate becomes a sore thumb.
Right, it sticks out. And people looking at locating in Iowa or developing in Iowa say, oh my gosh, the tax rate there is so high, and they turn the page to look at some other state. And I mean, economic development people have been talking about that for years, and it's been falling on deaf ears. I think people are starting to listen now. The other thing, part of the tax reform that we might see, and we're starting to see this year, is Representative Pat Grassley of the Appropriations Committee talking about capping tax credits. The state has, I don't know how many tax credits. I mean, it goes from every,
57, I think.
57,
and it covers pretty much anything. Yeah, you're talking about liabilities, annual liabilities of like $425 million. And he's talking about capping those, looking at them individually, maybe ending refundability where some large corporations in Iowa are getting a check from the state. They're getting tax refund even though they have no tax liability. He's talking about ending that. I think those could be real fighting issues because it cuts across political lines. There are Democrats who would like to end refundability and end a lot of those credits. So I think it's going to be interesting to watch how the parties shift around that.
Aaron, how's this going to play out? In the past, everyone says, oh, tax credits, boo. Then you start picking one to get rid of.
Exactly.
And then all of a sudden the interest groups, all for one, and they all move to lobby the legislature and kill any effort to do away with the tax credit. Do we realistically expect many tax credits are going to be gone next year?
That's exactly the challenge. You summarized it perfectly. The conversation starts with, this is way too much. We need to take a look at these, limit these, maybe even get rid of some. Well, which one? Well, not that one. Not that one. And then someone, no, well, I don't want you to get rid of that one. And there's just, it's such a difficult political football to move.
So the way it gets done is you have a comprehensive tax package that takes on these credits while also lowering business tax rates, lowering personal income tax rates, and sort of giving someone while you're taking away at the same time.
The governor has made it clear that these credits are key, he believes, to economic growth. Now you look at some of these companies that are getting these credits, they're doing pretty well. They're multi-million-dollar, billion-dollar corporations. Is this something Kim Reynolds, we could see her be willing to get rid of some of these credits to big corporations?
She has yet to really signal her theory, her tax theory in full. And when they start ticking away at the research and activities credit, you're going to get people like the Monsantos and Pioneers of the world say, hey, we don't need to be in Iowa. We could be over in Illinois doing our research, and we don't need to be here with our highly paid research people.
You know, since they didn't do a tax piece in this session, did a lot of other things for other Republican interest groups, did the legislature miss an opportunity to do something for economic growth? I mean, aside from workers' compensation, what did they do that's going to create jobs and make the economy grow?
Republicans will argue their set of tort reform legislation will help business occupy the space in Iowa at a more economic rate. They won't have to face lawsuits over medical malpractice. Maybe there will be more doctors practicing obstetrics in rural Iowa. They make those arguments.
And they argue that the collective bargaining as well will make it better for districts to be more competitive in trying to hire teachers. I don't know many teachers I've talked to who agree with that assessment, but that's how Republicans have sold it.
You know, before we get too far, one thing they did that I think could come back to haunt them is that they voted to let hunting, fishing, and trapping license fees go up. Now, the way they wrote the bill is they passed the real decision about how much to the bureaucrats, so they can say, oh, we didn't want them to go up that much, but the bureaucrats and the Department of Natural Resources made that decision. But this could come back to haunt some people, one of whom talked about his redneck hunting friends not liking that. That could come back to haunt that person in the same way that we all saw several Democrats get knocked off when they raised the license fee for minivans.
Those are kind of issues that resonate.
Exactly.
James, I want to go to a couple other issues here. Abortion, we've talked about that a little bit. Where does that issue stand in the next session?
Well, I think as Aaron said, there will be a push maybe towards adopting a personhood amendment. Basically, life begins at conception, and adding more protections for unborn children. But I think that's an issue where there are a number of people who think they've done enough, that they've gone far enough with the 20-week ban. I think there are some people who are going to say, let's not run too fast with this until the courts weigh in. So I think there will be an effort, but I'm not sure it will be successful next year.
Well, the hope of Republicans and conservatives is that Neil Gorsuch's arrival on the U.S. Supreme Court means Roe gets overturned.
Rick Bertrand, a Republican from Sioux City, I talked to him about that this week, and he said he's one of those who will be pushing for the stronger, and he said that's part of the goal. It's part about the issue, but it's also part about getting this back into the courts, getting it back to the U.S. Supreme Court.
But is it realistic to think that by next January, the U.S. Supreme Court will have ruled one way or another on Roe v. Wade? I mean, so has that really changed much?
And doesn't that push it back into the courts? I mean, push it back into the states?
It could.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to have to deal with it anyway. So, I mean, this just sort of builds a framework.
Okay, speaking of issues that people care about, texting.
Exactly.
What's going to, change in law going to mean much?
This past week, Governor Branstad signed the law that makes texting and driving a primary offense. If you talk to law enforcement people, they say when they pull someone over and they say, hey, I caught you texting and driving, they don't have a warrant to take that cell phone out of that person's hand to see if they sent a text. And the person can say, oh, I was just talking on my speaker. I wasn't actually texting.
Or I was making a phone call.
Or I was, yeah, exactly. So what I predict is that there will be another push for hands-free behind the wheel. And Kim Reynolds has expressed her really strong support for that move.
I want to go to some of the other issues that are hanging fire and that are likely to be coming back. Water quality. It looks like they're not going to dismantle the Des Moines Water Works, Jason, but what is going to come out of this session? But more importantly, what are they going to be talking about next year?
Well, this issue is not going away. This is something that there still could be some action on in the waning hours of legislative session here, but what's being talked about now is not sort of commensurate to the issue that's out there.
Is water quality going to be an issue in 2018, Aaron?
I suspect it will be, yeah. As Jason alluded to, this is from the Iowa State University's analysis of this, a $4 billion program, and the bills that they've problem, and the bills that they're talking about raise somewhere in the hundreds of millions of dollars, but nowhere near getting to the big picture of. So I think this is going to be an ongoing issue for a number of years.
The reason it's an ongoing issue is because it's going to take decades to fix it. Right. It's not like I can spend $4 billion and kaput. Everything is fixed and water is crystal clear again.
Is there any, this debate, in my view, it seems to be at least been a healthy one. It's not been discussed this way before in the legislature. Is anybody going to change their minds about anything? James, do you think production agriculture has gotten the message that a lot of people don't think they have a right to dump all these chemicals in?
Some have. The Iowa Soybean Association, for example, seems to be sort of the leader in that among the ag commodity groups. However, you talk to some rural legislators and they say, well, you know, there's sort of a difference of opinion. You know, what does an impaired water mean? Right. You know, what does that mean? There's degrees of impairment. So they're not ready to buy the fact that, you know, buy into that the water is polluted and we need to do something right now and spend a lot of money on it.
And Jason, what about the flip side of that question? Do you think people in urban Iowa, in Des Moines, understand that production agriculture is pretty important to Iowa and the farm economy is pretty important?
Yeah, it's definitely not as immediate to them. And when there's, you know, a warning from the waterworks saying that the water might not be safe, that's definitely more immediate to them. This is the urban-rural divide issue of our time, and it's going to take a long time to work.
And water rates are headed north in Des Moines, and that ought to exacerbate. I wonder if redistricting will change the dynamic with fewer legislators coming out of rural Iowa.
Definitely, it will, because you'll have fewer voices from rural Iowa representing that viewpoint.
We've got just a minute left, real quickly. Terry Branstad is headed to China, most likely. What's going to change at the Statehouse after Terry Branstad's departure? What issues? Jason?
Well, you know, Kim Reynolds has been pretty quiet through this sort of transition period, but I think that we are going to see some new directions from her. She's going to want to put her mark on this last couple of years of a gubernatorial administration before she has to run for re-election.
Aaron, quickly?
I agree. I don't think she'll be a big departure from Governor Branstad, though. Kind of a Chamber of Commerce type Republican in general, wanting to do things that make for a friendly business climate.
10 seconds.
I think we'll see some new personalities at the Statehouse as some longtime Branstad people maybe take this opportunity to retire or seek other opportunities.
We're out of time. We'll be talking a lot about this subject in the future. Thanks to you all for being here today. And we'll return with another edition of Iowa Press next week at our regular air times, Friday night at 7:30 and Sunday at noon on our main IPTV channel, with a rebroadcast on our .3 World channel Saturday morning at 8:30. And also be sure to visit our Iowa Press website at iptv.org for more analysis of these issues with our weekly On Politics segment. For all of us here at Iowa Public Television, I'm David Yepsen, and thanks for joining us today.
Funding for Iowa Press was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation, Iowa Community Foundations, an initiative of the Iowa Council of Foundations, connecting donors to the causes and communities they care about, for good, for Iowa, forever. Details at iowacommunityfoundations.org. The Associated General Contractors of Iowa, the public's partner in building Iowa's highway, bridge, and municipal utility infrastructure.
I'm a dad.
I am a mom.
I'm a kid.
I'm a kid at heart. I'm a banker.
I'm an Iowa banker.
No matter who you are, there is an Iowa banker who is ready to help you get where you want to go. Iowa Bankers, allowing you to discover the genuine difference of Iowa banks.
Iowa Communications Network. The availability of high-speed broadband service is essential to fulfilling the promise of a connected Iowa. ICN's Broadband Matters campaign showcases the importance of delivering broadband to all corners of Iowa. Information is available at broadbandmatters.com.
UIE Care is helping provide access to healthcare services to more Iowans. By offering online visits with a University of Iowa healthcare provider, UIE Care helps Iowans seek medical care without leaving home. Learn more at uiecare.com.